Right. All right, everybody. Welcome to the fourth Tuesday, the elusive fourth Tuesday of the month. We are going to go through everybody's favorite topic, product media. I would say this one is light on technical content and standards content. And actually, we're going to focus in a little bit this month on the best practices. So, shout out to Jay and the best practices committee. They have been going standard by standard and posting the best practices to promostandards.org. If you log in under your member account, you can view the best practices under the resources. And essentially, I was looking for some tips and tricks and best ways to implement this, and found that we had an entire library of best practices built out for the media services. So we're going to roll through those towards the end of this after we go through the structure. And yeah, it should be a good time. For those of you all right, so I'm John Norris, the Chief Strategy Officer here at Hit Commercial Products. Kind of been around the block of promo standards, but I've been doing this education gig for quite a bit. Sounds like in the coming months, we're going to have some guest presenters, so it's not just going to be the John Show going forward on education. It's exciting stuff to be able to, build out the MVC and education. Essentially, Becky does all the hard work for education on the MVC, kind of puts together the agenda, and then I just get to front the thing and do some presentations every month. So excited to be here, not going anywhere anytime soon on the education front. So real quick, it's important that I think we do this every single month, but just kind of review our mission statement at PromoStandards. So we collaborate to create industry-leading open standards that enable participants to improve customer experience, reduce transaction friction, and effectively execute their digital strategy. Obviously, we give a big old shout out to the open standards portion. That's important. It's a collaborative piece. What we do here, I think it's gotten us to this point by using the community, using membership to drive the feedback. Right now, I think we're seeing a lot of the benefits of that feedback loop through the standards committee as they're embarking on this level setting of the standards and creating a whole new wave of standards, which we'll tease here at the end of the presentation. I think education for the next 4 months is going to get a little spicy with some new rollouts of services. So there we go. I talked about this last time. So let's save the date. So we are done with getting education sessions without John hawking the Tech Summit. Real quick, I know, if you have a calendar, just go ahead and block this off on your calendar so you don't book yourself festivities in between the AFC Championship and then the Bills winning the Super Bowl the next week. So book this on your calendar, save the date, lots of details. Our committee's forming next month to do this kickoff. So if you're interested in seeing how the sausage is made on a large scale technology event and want to participate, by all means, reach out to Jessica, reach out to Amy, reach out to the crew. The more the merrier. It's a massive undertaking. So going back to the Don, place was awesome. Hopefully we get a little bit better weather this time, but it'd be fun. There we go. All right, while you're all here, I know you're super excited to get into product media 1.1. That's the topic of the day. So let's do this. Real quick, I want to kind of let everybody understand what the PromoStandards services offerings are today, where this fits into the wild. So for the longest time, we were using all those colorful squares and, decided to just blast some smart art from PowerPoint and create some presentations here. So essentially, this is the service offering, and a little bit of this is the, I guess, birthing order, but also a bit of, I would almost say, a pretty good implementation path. If I were to adopt PromoStandards today from scratch, there might be a few exceptions, but I would say really start up here at the top with inventory, go around the clock, order status, OSN, product data. So really you have those first three, and pardon my scribbles, just what you get in PowerPoint. So you really have those core three services that we talk about a lot. And then, we really next is that product set. And I'm looping the compliance into there, which is where we talk about product compliance, Prop 65. That's really where its focus is today. You're going to notice here some new names, some new services that, we're going to tease in the coming end of this presentation, but that'll be the next few months. So really, that bottom left quadrant is purchase orders, invoices, and remittance advice. It's pretty much, and probably in that order, it's giving you a purchase order, telling you how I want to get paid, and then sending you my invoice. So those three go hand in hand, and then these two don't necessarily go together, but I needed to loop them together with something. So then we have the company information service, which really feeds purchase order, PPC. That's an important piece. And then order management, which I'm still touting as probably one of the more significant services that the industry's had, and I think it'll be the most impactful from a overall, I don't want to use the word disruption, but I think it's the missing link that like we've all been seeking on the PromoStandards dual communication route. So I'm super pumped for that one. So here we go. So what are we here to talk about today? Product media, right? So it sits right into this product data quadrant. So really, I would say implementation path. Product data has two services, 1.0, 2.0. I would always implement 2.0 because it has basic website level details. That's your informational data. So your basic 4-column pricing, however many columns of pricing, basic decoration. It now has a standard image in there where it didn't have in 1.0 because they were separated. But after you get done with product data 2.0, I think the next jump and logical path, especially if you're trying to feed up your images to your supply chain, product media. So it's cleverly called product media. I would say 95% of the usage today in the wild is using images, product images, but I think that has very much started to transform into other use cases around art templates, compliance documents, which is a bit of a hack. You're seeing videos being transmitted through there. I think what once a lot of documents, right? So what once started as a, hey, here's my, 3 color images for this product is now kind of morphed into what it was mainly intended for. So, real quick, kind of some background on the product media service. This thing was one of the early services. I kind of jump between the history and then the future. There's not a lot of attractiveness to messing with this service. There's 398 supplier endpoints for product media today. So unless there's a really compelling reason to quote unquote level set the service, we're probably just going to kick around with product media 1.1. There is one use case that keeps coming up, and I think the compelling reason to ever update this service would be to include some of the XY coordinates for imprint areas for optimization of virtuals. That is putting those green imprint area boxes on the images. It probably fits into here. I'd say right now there's only a handful of suppliers that actually have that data. If a handful, I know of 3 only, but maybe there's more. But yeah, I think that's the compelling reason to make the jump. But right now, 1.1 gets the job done. It's been out there since 2016, went live in 2017. Like I said earlier, its main purpose is we could have hundreds and hundreds of product images come back per product ID. And it's really a structured way to return all of that. We talked about adoption rates. It's heavily used. Mainly it's heavily adopted because this was excluded from product data 1.0. So in order to get images, everybody adopted product media. It's the right way to do it. Uses in the wild. I think we're starting to see more and more people do more than just display these images on their website, right? You're starting to see more people consuming blank images and trying to do virtuals and consuming, the blank images and putting them as part of their proofing process. I know here at HIT, we're starting to serve up more and more templates, right? The everybody's chasing a improved process for proof automation. And, is it going to be AI? Is it going to be using my templates? Is it going to be some sort of pre-press automation software? It's all over the place. So, I think what once was a simple use case for media has now started branching out in the last 18 months. So it's not as sleepy of a service as it once was. So that's exciting for this thing. From a structure standpoint, it's pretty simple, right? There's two methods. There's media content, which is the core of here's all the details that we're going to dive into here in a few minutes. And then there's the media date modified, which just like every other service, there's all the helper services that say, hey, when did you last change these images? Because I don't want to call I think the hit endpoint returns a few 100,000 images, right? So obviously, if you don't have to query those and do the diff and delta on your side, be just using the date modified is a much more logical way to do this. So real quick, and bear with me here as we go through this fun part of the session. I'll try to call out as much stuff as possible as we get into this, as we go through things I think is relevant. Call out any required fields, but we'll let's get into this. This is the request, similar request, what you see with every single PromoStandards service. Obviously, always has the version. But you can say it's a bit redundant, but obviously my example over there on the right is wrong. The version's 1.1.0. Why is this one of the odd services that has the something other than 1.0? The initial version, before we had any Rails on the release process, got pre-released in the wild with an epic bug, and we quickly had to rev the service, and that's where the 1.1 came from. So if you were curious, that's a bit of the history behind it. It was a bit of a whoops, put a wrong version out to the wild for a month, but that's the way things were in 2016. 2024 is a much more refined process. Obviously, username, password, same as everything. Culture name. So this is you see this used in product data 1.0 and 2.0. Essentially, this is language support, right? So I would say 99.9% of all requests in this field, it's always EN-US. Obviously, the next highest use case would be ENCA. Well, I guess if you probably not, I'll take that back. I'll say the CAFR, right? The French Canadian is a popular one. But essentially it's US and Canada support. So if your product data is clever enough and you support the difference between COLOR and COLOUR, good for you. You're better than the rest of us. But it's just, a lot of this is future support, right? So we've been having many inquiries from other countries around the world on if PromoStandards will work for them. This is some of that future proofing, right? Where if somebody in the UK wants to roll their own, we can support those cultures. Nothing crazy. Media type, we're going to jump into media type on the next slide. This is probably the most important piece of the product media service. Everything else is pretty bare bones with product ID, product part ID. We get into class type as well. So between media and class type, those are the real two nuances of this service. So I just want to jump into those. So obviously in the request, which it is, class type is not required. I would recommend that you put this into your request to limit the response sizes. Like I said, some of these things are ridiculous once you get into various sizes, various SKUs, colors. Imagine the Gildan 5000 with, if you just didn't put a class type in there or a media type, you're gonna get a hot mess of a response. I think it would even rival the PPC responses in terms of payload. So my recommendation, you'll see it towards the end, is make sure you're filling out those class types. Media types, it's required. So, but within the class types, or we're calling media class here, it's actually the class type. So you essentially have an entire slew of options. Now, I would say from a implementer standpoint, the biggest ones that are out there, blank and decorated, obviously the most important ones. Primary is also that. It tends to be your group shot, and you'll see how we support that coming up in the response. But I would say blank decorated primary is important. Some of these other class types are a bit of a hack, honestly, because, and I think we could argue this, but the media response supports decoration. We're getting this decoration method and decoration location. So the fact that we're kind of duping the locations on the front, rear, right, top, left, bottom, all those like different views is, I guess, a bit suspect. But I would say in the wild today, the three biggest ones are blank, decorated, and primary. You don't see a lot of swatch. Now, over here on this flip side, you are starting to see a larger amount of art templates. I think that's a very high use case. If you are not returning your art templates and media today as a supplier, I would recommend you do that. There is a shout out to the Extentech crew. I know that their uh, tools have a setting to pull in the templates and feed all of your templates into all of their NetSuite instances. Um, I would say Specs is another one you see. You see zero uses of podcast out there, but it's one of those things where, it's an option. So the big ones there, the thing is, use these class types. Try to use them as explicitly as possible. Blank, decorated, primary, art templates. If you use those four, you're going to get a long way. Try not to use unspecified. It's useless to anybody consuming it. They're just going to ignore it. And you're going to make them do a lot of work. So the other things, those enumerations for media types, same thing. I would say, this is obviously going back here. You pass this into the request type of media. This is a required field. So 99.9% of all requests I've ever seen use image. I would say even most people, and right or wrong, and we'll defer to the best practices on this, are, I would say, are using images even for the templates. You could argue that that could be a document, but I was in the wild, every request we process essentially has image, very few videos, very few audio. And then unless you had a specific use case for documents, if you and a trading partner in your supply chain, had a predetermined, this is how we're going to pass these documents between each of us, by all means do that here in the media service. But I'd say in the wild, it's mostly images. Real quick, just a sample request, nothing fancy, right? There's your incorrect service version, ID, password, culture name, ENUS, media type image. That's our hit Intrepid 56035. Part ID is optional. Oddly enough, you're about to see a best practice coming up where they would like you to use the part ID as much as possible on apparel SKUs because there are such vast image responses in apparel between sizes and colors. So I would say while not required, it's probably a good field to use just to cut down those response times. Class type, obviously, if you look back at this thing, I'm passing in the decorated class type. So essentially this request here will return you all of the hit 40-ounce Intrepids that are decorated, that are images, and all of our English culture names. So I guess that would be your trigger to where if I had French names, you would pass in something different, but we are not supporting that today. All right, let's get into the responses here. Not a lot of exciting stuff going on here, and I'll pop over and show some examples of what our hit response looks like, just so we can kind of have it on file. Same deal as every product related service, product ID, part ID. Most important piece of the equation here, I'm going to highlight some required fields. Part ID is not required. Please, please, please return your part ID in the responses. One thing that I think you will have debate on is your group shots. So I would recommend that if your single part identifier is false, meaning that it is a group shot, then do not return a part ID. Meaning group shot, this Intrepid has 17 colors. I have one image that has all 17 in there. I would leave the part ID empty and then return the single part as false, indicating group shot, non-specific part ID. The use case for the part ID is say, hey, I need your blank white or your decorated white 40-ounce tumbler. That's when you press in the part ID. That's where you get the URL. Media types, we just went through those. Essentially, you get what you pumped into the response or to the request. Class type, we just went through that. File sizes. So this is, and we're getting some great best practices on file sizes, heights, width, DPI. If you have this information, I would use it. It's very useful to, especially heights and widths. A lot of people trying to figure out the proportions. Their distributor service providers are pumping these images into some sort of image manipulation process. Just the more work you can provide here, the better. I get it. You might not be storing these, but if you're not, you really should be. DPI, it's just important. I would say color description is not required. We'll get into some examples of that. Real quick on the decoration array. Essentially, these are those decoration methods that you see over in PPC, right? Decoration ID and the name. So if this is a laser engraved tumbler, you would see from hit, decoration ID 15 and then laser engraving as a decoration name. Similarly, the locations, this caught us off guard internally recently. We forgot that it actually supported this functionality. Essentially, this is if you have this data, also populate it. This is the front. So, this image here is showing the front. And, the front ID is 199, and this is the location name. One thing we're starting to see is a request for more and more people to provide location IDs and names on blank images, essentially saying in this blank picture, what location is visible. Use case there is obviously virtualing a virtual software, or people trying to create their virtual tools, some sort of proofing process. So, definitely some use cases along the way. Other pieces here. Description about the media, I don't think I'm not seeing a lot of that being used out in the wild. Single part, very important. This is a required field. Make sure you get your logic right on the single part, right? Is this, if you have two of the same, like white mug front and back, that's a single part true, right? That's it. Is there only one part ID in there opposed to your group images? Also, please utilize the change timestamp down here. That's going to be very important for the next method that's coming up. Distributors and service providers don't want to consume an endless amount of, images and have to do all that math themselves. And, essentially you're trying to compare pieces of the file and see if anything's changed. Do that work for them. You obviously know when your user uploads a new image or something gets changed in that image. Just record that date and pass it in the service. Do everybody a favor, please. Real quick, just kind of an example of the response. I took this from the web service validator, so nothing too overly impressive. But if you look here on the left, this is a typical response. And the get media content response, it returns an array of media contents. Then this particular response, which is, I think I filtered on decorated, laser engraved Intrepids at hit. So there's there's about 8, 9 different images or product IDs that come back. So over here on the right, this is a typical response, right? Your product ID, part ID, always return both of those. Most importantly, your image URL. Make sure that these image URLs you can click through to. You don't need to credential against. I got time for that. There's your image type of media. This one here is a decorated class ID 1002 image. It is laser engraved image, 58, single part, false. So we got some funky stuff going on there. So, this typical response, and then, like I said, not rocket science on this, but the biggest thing is get these product part IDs in there, get your media types right, your class IDs right, then you're off to the races. Real quick on this product media modified, media date modified, then we'll hop into some best practices. Very similar. Every promo standards method now is really, or service has these helper functions on them. Only one helper function on this essentially says, give me your username, password, and culture name, and then say, hey, beginning date time stamp since the last change. So if you're saying, hey, I want everything that's changed in the last 7 days, pass in a, today's date, current date -7, and then, however you want to do it. So just very simple, and all that does is returns a list of part IDs and product IDs. Note it doesn't return the specific images. It's just saying, hey, these are the part IDs that have changed. Yes, if that returns 8 images, we don't specifically say which one of those has changed. Probably not the best, but it's better than querying hits 100,000+ product IDs, or part IDs. So nothing exciting there, but just a call out of suppliers, please use the date timestamps. That's very important. It cuts down if you're complaining that a distributor or a service provider request is hitting your services too often, this is how you reduce it. Give them good data to query on, and they will 100% guarantee you they don't want to pound your services any more than you want them to destroy them. So that's the thing. All right, so let's I gave a shout out earlier to the best practices committee. We're gonna go through a few different tips here. These are all available on the website, but I know a lot of you aren't always digging into some of the best practices. But I think as we go through on these services, education going forward, we'll always call out these best practices. So we'll go through a few for distributors or suppliers, hop into a few for distributors, and then we'll kind of wrap this rhino up for the day. Obviously, we've been saying earlier that apparel products have multiple sizes, multiple images per color. Things get complex fast and the SKU counts. So to reduce payload size duplication of data across all sizes for color, use the color field. That's the color field, which is right there, the color description field. I would say you could also use the color or the part ID field. Sorry, bounce around here. There it is. Media API includes a product ID without a part ID, has a color field set to the official name of the color. So this is saying that there are a few use cases where people don't support part IDs. If that applies to you, use the color field. It's kind of a hack, in my opinion. My recommendation is to always use part IDs. Your product probably has some sort of variant. Don't try to sandwich it into some naming convention into your product IDs. That's dirty. So either if you're not going to use the part IDs, you've really got to use the color. You have to give the distributor a fighting chance to not have a massive response and payload on these. When calling the media for an individual part, only the relevant media for that part should be returned. This is another thing we see in the wild. The distributor doesn't want all of your nonsense data. If they're saying, give me the black tumbler, don't return the white tumbler. It's odd that we have to call these things out, but this is the purpose of the best practices. Best practice committee sees what's being done in the wild, and the more we can call them out, the better. So some other best practices for suppliers include a class type with each image. I keep saying that. That's not required, but I would say highly useful. I'd say, is it decorated? Is it blank? Is this your primary image? Is this a template? Those are the things you want to put in there. This is a great call out here. And I know that suppliers are not always conscious of this. So provide only the largest image available and let distributors create optimized versions. So right now, what you see a lot of suppliers are doing is like, hey, here's my thumbnail image. Here's my product page image. Here's my large high-res image. Just realize what the distributor's doing. Image manipulation and downsizing on the fly isn't nearly as complicated as it was 10, 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, and 8 years ago when the service was created. So I would say to cut down your payload, just give them the one large image. Now, make sure it's not stupid large and, you know, uh, hundreds of megabytes where, you're trying to, you know, overcomplicate it, but be reasonable with your file sizes. Give them one large image, let them downsize it and have it meet their needs. Everybody's got a different set of requirements for their image sizes for their own websites. Don't serve up 50 different versions and make them pick based off of pixel size. Provide a primary image for each part, 100%. So what you see a lot of distributors doing is they query your services and they say, I only want the primary. I don't need all these, different color variants. And if you don't have a primary, then they're left to guessing. They're going to probably pick the first one that comes back in the response, which is not great. So always include primary. We talked about this. Group product photos should not be associated with a part ID, right? I talked about that. So just another call out there. Definitely put your blank images in your media service. If you are a supplier, your goal is at the end of the day to sell more products. There's a lot happening in the industry around automation of virtuals. This is how they're doing it. They're going to pull your PromoStandards blank images and feed them up. Make sure you're returning blank images. Some class type recommendations for suppliers. We've talked about a little bit of this, just kind of some other call outs. Be sure to use the primary class, all right, to highlight your primary image for product or part. This is another good point, a great call out. You can identify the primary image for both a blank and a decorated, right? Obviously, if back to the virtual discussion I keep bringing back up, distributors want to know, hey, maybe they're going to take it and only display your blank images. They need to know what's the primary one. I think this is something that we weren't doing on all of our products up till recently. I know we've adapted this best practice. This is a great call out. You need to have a primary image for your blank and primary image for your decorated. Just food for thought there. Although initially defined for video quality, class type standard definition 2000 and high definition 2001 can be useful when classifying large size images. That's a pretty sweet call out too. I guess the purpose of this is if you are going to have those stupid huge image sizes, put this high definition in the XML so that way they know don't automatically download this 500 megabyte image, right? Just a lot of this comes down to common sense, and that's a great call out by the best practices committee. So I'm liking these so far. So real quick on the best practices for distributors. Do not use a supplier repository as a CDN. Download media locally and copy for internal use or on your website. Yes. Do not base your business practice on the supplier's endpoints constantly being up and the ability to real-time download their images. It is a bad practice to just hammer the media service and download it on the fly. Store them locally, resize them to your demands, cache them, do whatever you need to, but throw them in your own CDN, but don't make the supply, imagine the craziness of pulling 498 different suppliers images on the fly and hoping that all of them come back with a reasonable response time and are always uptime. So it's a great call out. Leverage image resizing services software to get media to the dimensions that are required. There's a great list of them. Image Magic, Kraken, Graphics Magic, Image Processing System. There's a handful of them out there. I mean, you just Google this up and I think you get a pretty good selection for what you need. Leverage the color field and color size based apparel when the color is known. Obviously, this is just trying to reduce the response time and response payload. So if you want the orange extra large, pass in the part ID for the orange extra large. Don't just pass in the product ID and then try to parse all the individual parts. So great call out there. Good job, best practices committee, making it happen. All right, so that's 35 minutes of exciting product media. Reminder, and I'm going to answer questions here in a second if we have any. But education is we're going back to the third Tuesday of every month, 2 p.m. Eastern. We've been on a pretty good tear. We have a plan. Becky's built out a calendar, which we'll share in the general channel of Slack what the upcoming education things are. But most importantly, it's kind of, sling back to it, order management, remittance advice, company info. There is an OSN 2.0, 2.1, which is, we kind of pre-released OSN 2.0. 2.1, we're trying to solve in a single service. Not trying to, we are solving the advanced shipment notifications. And ASN and OSN were so similar that we were able to take some of the existing data structures of OSN and jam into an ASN. And we're trying to incorporate some LPN discussions in there as well. So, there's a lot. We're about to drop a lot in the next 6 months. So buckle up there. I think it's an exciting time. We've been talking about some of this stuff for a while. It's finally the point where these things have gone from alpha testing to beta testing. Many of these have 3 or 4 distributors and service providers and suppliers live consuming them in the wild to make sure that this stuff works. We're not releasing bugs where we have to go back and rev the versions real quick. So how the sausage gets made is getting a little bit cleaner these days. So think of it's our own FDA facility coming up out of the meat locker. So these are all good improvements. So that's all I have. Q&A is quiet on the Q&A front. That's not always a bad thing. There's not a lot of questions to be had on product media, so I'm not offended that nobody has questions. We'll give everybody about 5 more seconds for Q&A. All right, everybody, we did it. Success, another one. We will see you next month. Thank you all for attending. Third Tuesday every month. PromoStandards Education, 2 o'clock. See ya.